Hey there, Dodd, if you've stumbled across this video. Chances are you're either trying to fall asleep, you're mildly curious about medieval history, or both. Either way, welcome. Tonight, we'll be gently peeling back the hood on one of the most overglorified jobs in medieval history, the assassin, not the cool, parkour flipping, rooftop jumping kind you see in movies or video games. No secret societies. No slow motion sword fights. Just cold feet, rested knives, and the occasional nosebleed from climbing a church wall in the dark. So go ahead, dim the lights, maybe adjust your pillow, and settle in. This is the story of why it absolutely, undeniably sucked to be a medieval assassin. Let's start with the fantasy, the black cloak, the hidden dagger, the noble cause. A master of stealth who moves through the shadows like a ghost with perfect balance and a tragic backstory. Sounds dramatic, right? Now, forget all of that, because in reality, most assassins weren't trained warriors or mysterious monks raised in mountaintop temples. They were broke, hungry, and usually bad at long-term planning. Becoming an assassin in medieval times was not a choice. It was more like something that happened after all your other life options caught fire and rolled off a cliff. You didn't apply for the job. You fell into it, usually because someone needed a problem handled quietly, and you were just desperate enough to say yes. Maybe you were a failed soldier, thrown out of the army for sleeping on watch. Maybe you were a thief, too clumsy to pick pockets, but just sneaky enough to survive a back alley fight. Maybe you were a peasant with nothing but a pair of decent shoes and absolutely no witnesses willing to testify against you. Congratulations, you just became an assassin. There was no ceremony, no fancy uniform. No one handed you a little scroll with congratulations on your new career in murder. You were just suddenly hiding in barrels, crouching in gardens, and wondering how many coins your life was worth today. And the truth is, it was never very many. Being an assassin wasn't noble. It wasn't glorious. It was exhausting. Cold nights, wet boots, shaking hands, and the constant fear of being spotted by a goat. Not a guard, a goat. Because even animals could raise alarms in some of the places these missions took you. There were no benefits, no days off, no career advancement. You didn't get a raise after your third successful job. You didn't get invited to secret banquets in candlelit cathedrals. You got the same thing every time, a suspicious glance, a vague map, and maybe a pouch of silver coins, half now, half later. Spoiler alert, later usually meant never. So why do we start with assassins? Because they're the perfect example of how badly history can be misrepresented. Everyone wants to imagine themselves as the silent hero, but the truth is far less cinematic. Most assassins weren't heroes. They weren't even villains. They were side notes in someone else's story. Names no one remembered. Shadows no one missed. And that's kind of the point of tonight's episode. History, real history, is rarely exciting. It's usually uncomfortable, messy, and painfully quiet. Like a long walk in the fog with the faint sound of coughing behind. That's what tonight is. A soft drift through the darker corners of the past, told slowly, sleepily, and with just enough sarcasm to keep you from snoring too loudly. So if you're hoping to hear about ancient secret orders and poetic justice with a hidden dagger, this might not be your dream story. But if you'd like to fall asleep learning why medieval life was less adventure and more allergic reaction to moldy bread, you're in the right place. Get comfortable, because this is not the Assassin's Creed. This is the boring, itchy, cold, slightly damp reality, and it only gets worse from here. Let's be honest, no child in the Middle Ages ever said, when I grow up, I want to hide in a rain barrel for 3 days, eat cold turnips, and maybe get stabbed in the dark by someone named Bernard. That just wasn't on anyone's career plan, Becoming a medieval assassin wasn't something you chose. It was something that happened to you, like food poisoning or being struck by lightning, unplanned, and followed by a lot of crouching. Usually. It started with failure. You were a soldier who fell asleep on watch, a servant caught stealing a candlestick, a thief who got too bold, too often. Maybe you had skills, once good ones, but you lost your place, your rank, your home. And once you fell low enough, someone somewhere noticed that you were still breathing, still able to walk without a limp, and perhaps more importantly, had no one left who'd miss you. That's the first requirement for becoming an assassin in medieval times. Being forgettable, not skilled. Not brave, just forgettable. The second requirement, a serious lack of options. Most assassins were already falling through the cracks of society. They'd burn bridges, dodge taxes, and maybe slept in a few too many barns they didn't own. The kind of people who knew how to disappear into a crowd, even if they smelled like sheep and regret. And that's when the job offer came. Or rather, the suggestion. It wasn't formal. No parchment with gold seals. No ceremony. No dramatic whisper from behind a curtain. Usually, it was someone sliding a coin purse across a splintered tavern table and muttering a name. Handle this, quietly. No details. Just a name, a vague direction, and maybe a warning. He's got guards. She travels with dogs. Don't mess this up. And what did you say? You said yes, because you were hungry, because you were cold, because you didn't want to go back to sleeping behind the blacksmith's outhouse. Now, were you trained? Of course not. There was no training montage. No wise mentor with riddles. No weapons workshop. You didn't get shown how to scale a castle wall or mix a sleeping powder. You got a dull dagger, a vague target, and a terrifying sense that this was either going to work or end with your feet sticking out of a moat. That's how most assassins got started. Not with ambition, with necessity, with the deep, slow-burning panic of having no future unless you carved one out with a borrowed blade. And those first few jobs, they weren't grand. You weren't taking out barons and dukes. You were sneaking into sheep pens and silencing informants. Maybe it was a messenger who knew too much. Maybe it was the guy who owed money to the wrong noble. Either way, the targets weren't famous. They were just inconvenient. And you were cheap. Not trusted, not skilled. But available. And available was enough. What made you good at it? Well, nothing at first, but you learned. You learned that silence matters more than speed, that shadows are better than swords, that being early means waiting, and waiting means cold, and cold means you better get used to shivering with purpose. You also learned how to lie. Not to your targets, though that helped, but to everyone else, because you couldn't tell people what you did, not even your friends, not even your dog if you had one. You had to make up a fake job. I'm a traveling tinker. I'm in cloaks. I sell dried fish. All while carrying a dagger tucked in your boot and a name echoing in your head. And if someone asked why, you didn't sleep much. You just smiled and said something vague about back pain and long roads. People believed it. They wanted to believe it, because believing anything else meant danger, and nobody liked that before bedtime. Now, here's the part they don't talk about, the guilt. You weren't a monster. You were tired. And sometimes after the job, when the coin was cold in your hand and the night too quiet, you felt it. The weight of what you'd done. The silence afterward. The breath you didn't hear anymore. And that's when it started. The detachment. The hollowing out. You stopped asking questions. Stopped wondering what your target did to deserve it. Stopped hoping for better jobs because hope made it harder. And when things went wrong, and they often did, there was no backup plan. No healer. No escape route. Just you and your luck, which wasn't great. One wrong step on a creaky stair. One locked window you thought was open. one servant who wasn't asleep yet. That was all it took, Dot, and if you got caught, there wasn't a trial. There wasn't mercy. There was a rope and a crowd, and maybe a sign hung around your neck that said traitor or spy or simply don't try this. So why did anyone keep doing it? Because once you started, you couldn't stop. Dot. No one hires an assassin with a clean record. They want someone with a reputation, and once you had one, you were stuck with it. You couldn't become a baker or a merchant. Dot. No. One trusts a man who knows too many ways to be quiet. Dot. So you kept going. One job at a time. Dot. Always moving. Dot. Always watching. Always wondering if the next job would be the one that ended with a sack of silver or a closed door that never opened again. And so, from failure and fear, the assassin was born, not legendary. Not heroic. Dot. Just someone who survived long enough to be useful and quiet enough to vanish when the story was over. Dot. Now, breathe out slowly. You're not one of them. You just get to listen, and maybe, just maybe, fall asleep knowing you never had to hide in a turnip cart at midnight. Let's get one thing out of the way. There were no hidden blades. Dot. No wrist launching. Grappling hooks. Dot. No stylish cloaks with embroidered skulls. This isn't a video game. This is medieval Europe. And if you wanted to kill someone quietly, your choices were limited. And by limited, we mean awful. The average assassin didn't carry a secret weapon passed down through a legendary bloodline. He carried whatever he could steal without being chased. Most of the time, it was a knife, not a nice knife. Not even a clean one. Just a dull, rusting thing pulled off a guard or dropped in a muddy street by someone in a hurry, if you were lucky. And we mean found dash, a dash coin dash, and dash dead dash guy single quote cis boot. Lucky your dagger wasn't chipped. But most of the time, it bent the first time you hit bone, which unfortunately happened more often than you'd think. Then there was rope. A rope was useful in theory. You could climb with it, tie someone up with it, strangle someone if you had the arm strength and knew which end went around the neck. But medieval rope wasn't silky or soft. It was itchy, scratchy, and always somehow wet. Half the time it broke. The other half, you got rope burn and had to explain to your contact why your hands looked like you'd lost a fight with a cheese grater. Let's not forget poison. Dot. In stories. Poison is elegant. A few drops in a goblet, a quick, painless end. But in real life, poison was more like gambling with a salad. Most medieval poisons were made from plants, rocks, or frogs. The recipes were passed down by word of mouth, which meant a lot of room for error. Sometimes the poison worked. Dot. Sometimes it just made the target throw up and take the next week off work. And sometimes you mixed up the cups and accidentally poisoned yourself, which, for the record, did not look cool. Also, there was no such thing as dosage. You didn't have a scale. You just mashed up some leaves and hoped for the best. If your target got dizzy, great. If they grew a second head and screamed at the moon, that was not your fault. Probably your toolkit didn't include smoke bombs or knockout gas. It included a spoon, some wax string, and whatever sharp object you hadn't lost yet. You learned to be creative. Slate roof tile. Sure, that's a weapon now. Rusty nail. Better than nothing. Shoe buckle with a jagged edge. That'll do in a pinch, and heaven forbid your main weapon broke or fell into a fireplace mid-job. There were no backups, no second daggers tucked into your sleeve. Just panic. And maybe a bread roll to throw as a distraction, which, sadly, only worked on dogs. Disguises were not helpful either. You weren't wearing a sleek assassin hood. You were wearing whatever fit. Peasant tunic 2 sizes too big. Perfect. A monk's. Robe that smelled like damp books and onions. Close enough. You didn't look deadly. You looked confused, and that was kind of the point. Blending in meant looking like everyone else who hadn't bathed in weeks, limped from a questionable past injury, and had that special medieval glow, also known as malnutrition. Weapons. Training. There wasn't any. You didn't have a dojo or a sparring partner. You learned how to kill the same way you learned how to cook in medieval times, by doing it badly until you got it sort of right. Fast, sloppy, and full of regret. You never carried a sword. Too big, too noisy, too suspicious. Daggers were small, quiet, and easy to hide. That is, if you had anything worth hiding them in. Most assassins kept their blades wrapped in cloth, stuck in boots, or hidden inside stale loaves of bread. Not for cleverness. Just because no one would check the bread, arrows and bows occasionally. But let's be clear, they were bulky, obvious, and hard to aim when your hands were shaking. If you were lucky enough to have one, you still needed time, space, and no wind. 3 things medieval life rarely offered. You had one shot and it usually missed. Let's not romanticize the gear. The average assassin's loadout was sad. It was a checklist of things that wouldn't help you when everything went wrong. You didn't carry hope. You carried a butter knife, a handful of weird powder, and a deep personal grudge. And don't forget the noise. Every item made a sound. A jingle, a clink, a rattle. So you had to wrap everything in fabric, leather, or hay just to avoid sounding like a traveling. Cutler's shop. Nothing ruins a stealth mission faster than jingling your way through a sleeping castle. Even your shoes were a problem. Hard leather solace echoed on stone. If you were smart, you were cloth wraps. If you weren't, you sounded like an old donkey with a limp. And good luck running silently while tripping on your own hem. There were no upgrades. You didn't level up. You didn't unlock new gear. The only thing that improved was your instinct for danger and your ability to run away. Fast dot, your equipment didn't evolve. It just got dirtier. Your knife got duller. Your cloak got more holes. Your rope got shorter because you kept cutting it to tie things, then forgetting where you left the rest. And yet, somehow, you survived. Or at least, you hadn't been caught yet. Which, in this line of work, counted as success. You weren't stylish. You weren't prepared, but you were quiet. And sometimes, that was enough dot, so the next time you picture a shadowy figure leaping across rooftops with a sleek black hood and twin blades glowing in the moonlight, try instead to imagine a tired man in patched clothes, holding a kitchen knife, wrapped in cheesecloth, whispering to himself, "Please don't squeak. Please don't squeak. Please don't squeak." That was the assassin's gear, and that was the sad, sleep-deprived, clumsy truth dot. So, you've been given a name. And not just any name, someone important, a nobleman, a high-ranking official. Maybe even a bishop with a taste for gold and a suspiciously locked door schedule. Sounds exciting, right? Wrong. Very, very wrong. Killing a noble isn't like picking off a lone traveler or slipping something strange into a merchant soup. No, killing a noble is a full-time job that requires nerves of steel, legs that don't cramp easily, and a shocking amount of patience, because these people didn't get rich by being careless. They got rich by being terrified. Let's start with the obvious problem. Guards. Nobles didn't travel alone. They had guards at the front, guards at the back, guards who guarded the guards. Some were armored like walking barns, others just mean-looking with questionable hygiene and sharp objects. And unlike you, they were fed regularly. So trying to sneak past them while your stomach is growling. Not ideal. These guards didn't sleep much either. At least one was always awake, sharpening a blade or staring into the darkness just in case. Someone like you came creeping through the garden, which you were absolutely planning to do. Good luck with that dot, and if you thought getting into a noble's castle was simple, think again. Castles weren't houses. They were stone puzzles designed by people who really didn't like uninvited guests. The front gate, locked. The side door, guarded. The window, 3 stories up, behind iron bars, and overlooking a courtyard filled with dogs. Oh yes, the dogs. No one talks about the dogs. But they were always there, loud, suspicious, eager to earn a piece of salted meat by barking their heads off the moment. You moved. They didn't care about your mission. They just wanted to ruin your night. And then we come to moats. Why did nobles love moats? No one knows, but they all had one. And it wasn't just water. Sometimes it was filled with spikes. Sometimes snakes. Sometimes things that didn't have names but definitely had teeth. Trying to swim across it quietly in the dark while holding a dagger between your teeth. Not as cinematic as you'd think. Let's say somehow you made it inside. Error. Not done. Because nobles weren't just guarded. They were paranoid. They didn't sleep in the same room every night. They rotated chambers like they were playing some strange medieval version of hide and seek. One night they're in the east wing. The next night, the wine cellar. And if they were really nervous, they'd sleep in a decoy bed while the real bed stayed cold and empty. Because nothing says power like forcing your assassin to guess which blanket is real. And even if you found the right bed, you weren't alone. There were scribes in the hallway, kitchen servants wandering at all hours, stable boys, priests, torch bearers, and that one overly chatty guard who never took a break. You couldn't just walk in and make your move. You had to wait, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, all while pretending to be a silent monk or a very lost gardener. Waiting was exhausting. You'd hide in barrels, behind tapestries, under carts. You'd develop a deep appreciation for dark corners and the ability to hold your breath for uncomfortable amounts of time. You'd start to wonder if being an assassin meant becoming invisible or just being really good at standing still. And that's before we even talk about the killing part. You didn't just walk up and do it. No dramatic speeches. No epic final words. You had to be quick, quiet, and ideally gone before anyone noticed. Because the moment you were spotted, the entire castle would light up like a bonfire. Bells would ring. Guards would shout. And you'd be lucky if your boots made it back out with you. Even escaping wasn't simple. The route you came in, probably not safe anymore. So now you're climbing out a window, sliding down a roof, landing in a hay cart, and hoping the horses don't panic and drag you into a river. All while holding a dagger that probably broke in the first 5 seconds of your escape. And let's not forget, nobles had families. Big ones. Sons, daughters, nephews, cousins, half of whom were just waiting for someone to remove the current noble so they could take the chair. If they found out you were the reason, well, they might not kill you. They might just hire you, but probably not. More likely, they'd send a message with your name on it to their own set of guards. And round 2 would begin, because the problem with killing someone important is that everyone notices. And once they notice, they ask questions. And those questions lead to people. And those people lead to you. And you're tired, hungry, covered in dust, and trying to act like you just happened to wander past the estate during a full moon with a blade under your shirt. Let's be real. This was not glamorous. This wasn't some noble cause. It was a very bad idea wrapped in a worse plan, held together by desperation and a threadbare cloak. And yet, assassins kept trying because the pay was better. Not great, but better. And when you've spent the last 3 weeks eating boiled roots, the promise of silver is enough to make you try, but trying didn't mean surviving. Most assassins didn't live long enough to enjoy their earnings. They got caught, cornered, or simply vanished. Some ended up hanging from castle gates as warnings. Others were buried quietly in fields no one remembered. And a few, the lucky few, got out. They disappeared into the countryside, changed their names, bought a pig farm, tried to forget. But even then, they flinched when they heard footsteps behind them or saw a cloak that looked too familiar. So next time someone says, killing a noble sounds fun, you can gently remind them, sure, if you like dogs, spikes, boiling oil, and the crushing pressure of failure. If not, maybe just stick to selling bread, because at least bread doesn't sleep in a decoy bed guarded by a man named Ulrich with a crossbow, looking mysterious. Sounds fun, until you realize that in medieval times, mysterious just meant suspicious. And suspicious people got questioned, loudly, usually by someone holding a spear. So, no, you didn't wear a cool mask or a hood that fluttered in the wind. You were whatever you could find that didn't already belong to a corpse or smell like fermented goat milk. The goal wasn't style. The goal was survival. Let's start with the disguise itself. If you were trying to sneak into a castle, you had 3 basic options: monk, cook, or stable hand. None of these were glamorous. All of them involved dirt, sweat, and a look of constant confusion. You weren't aiming to stand out. You were aiming to blend into the background like a slightly damp wall. The monk disguise was the favorite. It came with a big robe, a hood, and a built-in excuse for being silent. People didn't ask monks many questions. They just nodded, bowed slightly, and hoped you weren't the type who preached for too long. But the downside? You had to look tired, poor, and spiritually stressed. If you smiled too much or walked too quickly, people started asking which monastery you were from. And if you got the name wrong, straight to the guard post. The cook disguise was risky. Kitchens were busy, hot, crowded, and full of sharp tools. But if you could hold a pot and pretend you knew what boil until soft meant, you could slip past a few doors. The trick was not dropping anything. Nothing gives away your fake identity faster than spilling stew on the noble's dog. There was the stable hand. This one was smelly. You had to walk like your boots were 3 sizes too big, carry hay, and pretend you weren't terrified of horses. If a horse didn't like you, it made a noise. If it made a noise, someone looked over. And if someone looked over, the disguise was done. Clothing was another problem. You didn't have a wardrobe. You had scraps. Most of the time, your disguise was stitched together from leftover fabric, half-burnt robes, and a belt that once held up someone else's pants. Nothing fit. Everything itched. And if it rained, the whole outfit started to smell like a wet cellar. Still, better than wearing your own clothes. That's how people got caught. One wrong thread. One sleeve that looked too foreign. And suddenly you're being asked questions you don't have answers to because no one trained you for this. You were making it up as you went, and then came the lies. Assassins didn't just wear disguises, they lived in them. Every job required a new name, a new story, a new reason why you were exactly where you weren't supposed to be. And the key: sound confident, but not too confident. The secum kind of confidence that says, yes, I belong here, while also saying, but I'm not important enough to ask questions about. I'm Brother Thomas, here for evening prayers. I'm Jorvik's cousin, the quiet one. I'm new. The kitchen master sent me. I'm the guy who fixes door hinges. None of it had to make sense. It just had to come out fast and sound like it belonged. If someone looked at you too long, change the subject. If someone asked for details, pretend to cough. If someone asked where you came from, point vaguely toward the stables and mumble something about hay. And always, always look tired. Tired people didn't get interrogated. They got ignored. The goal was simple. Get in, look boring. Get out, not know. Eye contact. No smiling. No suspicious sneaking. Real assassins didn't slink through shadows with a smirk. They walked with a tray of bread, stared at the floor, and hoped no one remembered their face. And let's not forget accents. If you didn't sound like you were from the area, people noticed. One wrong vowel, and suddenly you're not from around here, which turns into what are you doing here? Which turns into tie him up and search his bag. You had to copy voices you'd only heard once, try to match dialects you didn't understand, all while hoping your nerves didn't make your voice crack like a teenage scribe reading from a scroll. Everything was fragile. The disguise, the lie, the path you took through the hallways. One slip, and it all came crashing down. And when it did, you didn't have a backup plan. There were no alternate exits, no secret escape tunnels, just a lot of running. And maybe some pleading. And if that failed, a very sharp object hidden in your boot that you hoped no one had seen yet. Every job was a gamble. Not because you weren't smart, but because you were tired. Always tired. Always half hungry. Always thinking 2 steps ahead while making it look like you had no idea where you were going. That's the assassin's life. Pretending badly and hoping people believe it. And most of the time, they did. Because people didn't expect danger from someone carrying firewood or mumbling about prayers. They expected it from the loud guy in the corner, not the pale, quiet figure slipping past with a bucket and a prayer. But even when you got in, there was no time to rest. You were still on edge, still listening for footsteps, still watching shadows move across the wall. The disguise helped, but it didn't make you safe. Nothing did, because deep down you knew if one person saw through it, it was over. No second chances. No, I was just lost. Just a fast sprint toward the nearest window, and the terrifying realization that you were on the 2nd floor again. So yes, disguises helped, but they didn't protect you. They just bought you time to lie. Time to move, time to not die. And that, more than anything, was the real art of assassination. It wasn't about weapons. It wasn't about silence. It was about pretending just well enough to make it to the next moment. And when the job was done, and you were finally out of the castle, clothes soaked with sweat, hair stuck to your face, shoes full of mud, you took a breath, not a deep one, not a proud one, just a tired one. Because in this job, breathing meant you were still alive, and that was enough. Let's talk about money. Or more specifically, why you probably never got it. Being a medieval assassin wasn't just dangerous. It was deeply, painfully unrewarding. Yes, someone handed you a coin purse. Yes, they mumbled something about half now, half later. But what they really meant was enjoy this tiny handful of silver while it lasts, because you're never seeing the rest. Payment was a myth, like dragons, or decent shoes. The first time you were hired, it felt promising. A pouch jingled. It had weight. It felt like a step toward something better. And for a moment you thought, maybe this job has a future. Spoiler, it didn't. Most clients were careful. Not in a good way, in a don't leave any witnesses kind of way. That included you. After all, if someone could kill quietly, they could talk quietly too. And no noble, merchant, or back alley contact wanted a talking assassin walking around, knowing names and faces and exactly how the job went down. So what did they do? Sometimes they disappeared, vanished from the meeting spot, never to return. Other times they sent someone else, usually someone unfriendly, with a new message. You've been paid enough. Or worse, there's been a change of plans. And if they didn't send a message, they sent a knife right in your back, or your ribs, or on a particularly dramatic day, right through your tent flap at midnight. Because to them, killing you was cheaper than paying you. And honestly, they weren't wrong. You didn't have a contract. You didn't have a union. There was no medieval HR department where you could report late wages or unsafe working conditions. You couldn't walk into a guild hall and say, "Excuse me, I'd like to file a complaint." The only thing you could do was vanish faster than your client, Of course, some clients meant well. Sort of, they intended to pay you, really, just as soon as you finished the job, and proved it, and made sure it couldn't be traced back to them and didn't ask too many questions. That's where things got tricky, because how do you prove you completed a job? You couldn't take a selfie. You couldn't bring back a head. It was messy, smelly, and raised questions at border checkpoints. Most of the time, you just had to trust that your reputation would do the talking. But if you were new, no one trusted you, so they waited. Waited to hear rumors, waited for the target to miss a meeting, waited to see if their enemies got quieter. And while they waited, you went unpaid and hungry and very, very grumpy. Some assassins tried to demand full payment up front. Brave souls. These were usually the ones who vanished shortly after that conversation. It's hard to argue about coins. When you're at the bottom of a well, others learned to take what they could: silver rings, loose gemstones, a warm cloak, and disappear before anyone changed their mind. They didn't ask for promises. They didn't wait for applause. They got in, got out, and hoped they didn't become the next target. And let's not forget the traps. Some jobs weren't real. They were setups, political bait. You were told to take out a corrupt noble, only to discover you'd just stabbed a decoy in a room full of guards waiting to escort you to the local justice system, also known as the rope because in medieval politics, assassins were tools. Easy to use, easier to blame. You'd walk, and thinking you were doing something important. You'd walk out if you walked out with a price on your head and a dozen people pretending they'd never met you, and even when the job was real. Even when you survived, and even when the client didn't betray you, it still wasn't enough. Not for the nights spent hiding under carts, not for the meals. Skip. Not for the way your hands shook when it got too quiet. You'd get paid 5 silver coins, maybe 10, enough for food, a bed, and a little wine. But not enough to rest, not enough to stop, just enough to do it again, and again. Because once you took that first job, you were marked. Not literally, but word got around. Quietly, carefully. Someone who handles problems. Someone who knows how to stay unseen. And suddenly, you were getting offers you couldn't refuse. Not because you wanted to say yes, but because you couldn't afford to say no. The work didn't improve. The pay didn't grow. The only thing that changed was how tired you looked when you walked into the next job. Assassins didn't get rich. They got forgotten. No one built statues for you. No one sang songs about the time you slipped through a window and didn't trip over a sleeping hound. You were a shadow, a rumor, a whisper that faded the moment you left town. And maybe that's why the coins didn't matter. Because what you were really being paid in was time. Time to keep going. Time to eat one more meal. Time to buy a better cloak or patch the one you already had. Time to not die. For now. So yes, you got paid. In silver. And silence. In the brief comfort of a night where no one was chasing you. And maybe for a few hours, that was enough. Until the next name arrived. And the next promise, and the same old lie, you'll be well compensated. Sure, not right after the boiling oil and the angry guard with the mustache. Sleep tight. There's something you should know. Assassins didn't retire. They didn't settle down. They didn't open taverns. They didn't suddenly decide to raise goats and live a quiet life in the countryside. That kind of ending was for bards and storybooks. In real life, there was no exit strategy, just an end. Sometimes that end came quickly. Sometimes it waited in a dark alley, or behind a locked door, or in the silence after a job that went too well. But it always came, because being an assassin in medieval times wasn't a profession. It was a countdown. The lucky ones disappeared, not in a dramatic way. No cloaks flapping in the wind, no final whispers. They just stopped showing up. They moved to another town, changed their name, and hoped no one recognized the way they walked with their left hand always near their boot. Some tried to start over. They worked as farmers, fence builders, cloak menders. They did quiet, boring things that didn't involve climbing rooftops or memorizing guard patrols. And for a while it worked, until it didn't, because eventually someone came knocking. Someone with a name, a coin purse, and a memory. You're the one, right? The quiet one. And just like that, the exit plan collapsed. Again, others weren't. So lucky, they stayed in the game too long, got slower, got comfortable, forgot to check the second hallway, missed the sound of a servant clearing his throat, and then silence. No one looked for them. No one said help. They were just gone. Sometimes they were buried, but usually they weren't, because who would claim the body of someone who never existed? No name, no papers, no known family. Just a worn-out cloak, a dull blade, and the faint smell of regret. No funeral, no headstone, no final words. Just a cold spot in the ground where no one stopped to ask what happened. And that's the part no one talks about. The forgettable part. Assassins didn't leave legacies. They didn't get remembered. At best, they became a rumor. A warning whispered to guards during late-night shifts. Keep an eye out. They say someone got into the West Wing last year. Never caught him. At worst, they were erased completely. Not by design, just by time. Because no one remembers the shadow that passed by the window. No one records the name of the person who almost made history but disappeared before the ink dried. And yet, someone always took the next job. Why? Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was the thrill. But usually it was something simpler, something sadder. The same reason the first assassin took the job in the first place, because they didn't know what else to do, because the world didn't leave them many choices, because being invisible felt safer than being seen. So the cycle continued. One tired, hungry figure replacing another, one pair of quiet footsteps echoing after the last. Same cloak, same dagger, same haunted eyes. The work never ended. The risks never changed. The only thing that shifted was the name on the next pouch. And even that didn't matter, because names were just noise. Assassins didn't use theirs. Not for long. They answered to titles. To nicknames. To vague descriptions written in poor handwriting. On the back of a tavern menu. The silent one. The one who doesn't ask questions. The one who finishes things, and when they were gone, someone else would come, not because they were recruited, but because life pushed them off a cliff. And this job was the only place left to land. There were no goodbyes in this work. No farewell speeches, no last mission. One moment you were walking through a city with your hood up, thinking about dinner. The next moment, no one remembered your face. Even the people who hired you forgot, because they didn't want to remember. Remembering meant admitting they knew you, and knowing you was dangerous. Safer to pretend the job did itself. That the problem just disappeared on its own. And so did you. Maybe that's why so many assassins stopped talking after a while. They weren't mysterious. They were tired of hiding, tired of lying. Tired of waiting for the day someone would recognize them and ask the wrong question. Silence was safer. The quieter you were, the longer you lasted, the more invisible you became, the less chance you had of being dragged into a trap or a memory. Some dreamed of getting out, really out, of taking the last job, collecting the last pouch of coins, and riding away to someplace warm where no one asked where you'd been. But that place didn't exist, because no matter where you went, the job followed. Not as a person, not even as a threat. As a feeling that someone somewhere would always need you again. And if not you, then someone like you, just as broken, Just as quiet and just as doomed dot. So no, there was no retirement dot. There was no gentle ending. No scroll on the wall that said, "Thank you for your service." Just the slow fade of footsteps, the soft closing of a door, and the sound of a world that kept turning without you. You became part of the walls, part of the wind, part of the long, boring history that no one ever talks about in bedtime stories, because who wants to hear about a man who never spoke, never smiled, and never came home? Probably no one, except maybe you, lying there, listening in the dark, letting your eyes get heavy, because even boring history has echoes. And tonight, you've heard one of them dot, so here we are, the end of a very long, very quiet, and honestly very underpaid journey. You followed the footsteps of people most history books forget. Not warriors, not kings, just shadows, moving slowly. Sleeping lightly, hoping the floorboards didn't creak. Medieval assassins didn't live in glory. They lived in fear, in damp cloaks, in the kind of shoes that never quite fit and always smelled like mold. No dramatic exits, no candlelit speeches, just silence, dust, and the hope that no one asked too many questions. They weren't remembered, not because they weren't real, but because no one wanted to remember them. And maybe that's the part worth thinking about now, as your room grows a little darker and your eyes start to feel a little heavier. History, real history, isn't always loud. It doesn't always wear armor or ride horses or wave flags from tall towers. Sometimes it slips through kitchens at midnight. Sometimes it waits in barrels behind the stables. Sometimes it lives in people who had no choice but to keep moving, one job at a time. No songs were written for them. No statues built. They existed quietly, in the background, only stepping forward when the world needed something done. Quietly. And when they were gone, the world didn't stop. It didn't cry. It just carried on. That's the thing about being forgotten. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, like a candle burning low, until there's nothing left but smoke and a bit of melted wax. But tonight you remembered. For a little while, you walked beside someone who lived in shadows. You followed them down narrow hallways. Heard the rustle of their cloak, listened to the soft scratch of their steps on old stone floors. And now, you can let them go, not because they weren't real, but because it's time to sleep, and they were never meant to stay long anyway. You're not like them. You don't have to sneak through castles or sleep in barns or lie about who you are just to survive another night. You can rest. Safely. Softly. Without looking over your shoulder. And that's the quiet miracle of boring history. It reminds us how lucky we are to be ordinary. So close your eyes. Forget the daggers. Forget the moats. Forget the footsteps in the hallway. The night is still. The world is quiet. And somewhere, the last assassin has faded back into the dark. They didn't need a funeral, but maybe they needed it witnessed. Just once. Thanks for being that. Now breathe in. Slow. Deep. And let it go. Sleep well. Stranger. The story's over, and the shadows won't follow you tonight if you made it this far. Thanks for drifting through history with us. If tonight's story helped you unwind, consider subscribing. Only if it feels right. Leave a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's always nice to know who's out there listening quietly in the dark. And remember, sometimes the most forgotten lives hold the quietest lessons. Sleep well. You're safe here.